Alright guys, I hope everyone is doing well. It's been a while since my last video, but today we're going to cover putting Tundra shocks on the front of my first gen Tacoma with the camper and flatbed on the back, as I've been searching for a good suspension setup for this truck. Spent a ton of time the last couple years building that camper and working on everything else except for suspension for the most part. So the suspension has been lacking. So about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, I reached out to Sean at Shock Surplus. Great team, super nice guy, super knowledgeable. They do a lot of content on shocks and review them and kind of really help you walk through the process of what you might fit your truck well. But there wasn't really much on first gen Tacoma, and so I had this idea. Wonder if first gen Tundra valving and dampening would actually be a great fit for my truck, since my truck weighs almost as much as a first gen Tundra that's stock, and the shocks might be tuned perfectly for that. Because I have a steel bumper, weighs 117 pounds, plus a 50-pound winch in the front, and then I have a skid plate, and I have rock sliders, and then of course I have the rear flatbed and camper. So the whole truck, set up as it looks right now, is about 5,500 pounds to about 57 to even 5,900 pounds on a trip with me inside, with gas, with all the equipment, with all the food, all that kind of stuff. So between 55 to 59 at the max, that's Tundra weight. So I think the Tundra shocks, the valving and the Tundra shocks are a much better match. So that was my thought. I've had them on there for about 6 months. I'm going to show you how I install them, and then after we install them, I'll show you kind of give you my opinion on how they've been the last 6 months and whether or not these are actually one of the very best kind of budget-friendly, readily available, off-the-shelf suspension setups you can get up for a first-gen Tacoma like mine. So, all right, that was a lot. Let's do it.
Okay, so this is a really straightforward process to remove the coilovers on your first gen Tacoma. 3/4 inch nut and bolt at the bottom, and 3 14mm nuts on the top of the strut on the top. I think I used a hammer the very first time I did this to make more space where my hand is and to be able to fit the ratchet head up there. You may not have to do that, but you may have to, so keep that in mind. And then you just pull those guys out. So 3 nuts on top, 1 bolt on the bottom, and that's it.
So I've got the Tacoma ones out. I'm going to be reusing the top hat of the of this one right here. This is something I bought when I put these on the truck a couple months ago, so the rubber is all fresh. That rust doesn't look nice, but I'm going to be reusing this on top of the Tundra guys so that we'll have the same bolt pattern and spacing and everything like that. So first thing I got to do is just compress this coil, and then I can get the top off.
Now that I've got them out, it's time to compress the coils that are on your shock so you can remove that top hat. I'm reusing that top hat because that is the Tacoma specific spacing. Even though we are installing Tundra struts, the only difference as far as the truck is going to be concerned is that top hat. So to do that, you got to compress the coil so there's no pressure on it, and then you got to take the top nut on that's holding the top hat on. Use a crescent wrench to hold the shaft of the shock so that it doesn't spin inside the shock body, and use your wrench to remove the nut. And then I like to lay everything out like this so that I can easily put it back in the same order. Now we're going to set the ride height for the truck. You've got 8 selection points here. You move that snap ring up and down. I think I later settled on the number 3 position. The other ones were just too high or too low, so number 3 worked well for me with these stock coils with my truck setup. Okay, I wanted to talk about this particular tool I'm using here. This is a coil compressor. You can get coil compressors from the auto store, you can rent them, but the particular ones I'm using work so much better than the ones that are usually available at an auto store. These ones are telescoping, opposed to as like one piece of all thread, heavy duty, like a screw. These ones are telescoping, and they're a lot more resistant to bending and flexing, so it's a lot less dangerous. And also the feet that grab hold of the coils and compress the coils are a lot thinner, so you're able to place them in there a lot easier. And when you compress it, that's a big deal on these type of coils. If you compress it with those other like thicker feet, single threaded metal ones that you can get from the auto store, usually those feet end up getting stuck in the coil, and it mars up the shock body and just is a lot more dangerous, a lot harder to use. This particular set, no affiliation, they are on my Amazon store, and there's a lot of different brands that make the style of coil compressor just like these. The telescoping ones like this are the way to go, and these are only about 50 bucks. So that makes doing this whole thing at home a lot easier. Reinstalling the struts is just the same as uninstalling them, extremely simple. Slide them into the top. I like to put one nut on top just loosely so that it's hanging there and I have room to wriggle around the strut and find the hole for the bottom bolt. You might have someone help you. If you do have someone around, it's helpful for them to push up on the lower control arm and help you align that bottom hole. If you can't have a friend do it, you can use your legs to kind of press it up while using your arms. This is probably the most difficult spot to do this, or most difficult part of the install, depending on how well you align the top of your strut hat with the hole on the bottom of your strut. This time it took me a while, and I used my breaker bar to help like leverage and push that bolt through the bottom, because the bottom of the strut isn't like perfectly aligned with the hole, so I'm kind of trying to wiggle it in there and leverage it to the corner. I think this particular time when I was filming, I actually struggled quite a bit with this, and I'm leaving it in there just so that if you come across this issue, you know that that's normal as well. The time before, when I put in the previous struts, it just popped right through, but I think what's happening is basically the bottom of the strut is slightly twisted in correlation to the two mounting holes, and that makes it really hard for the bolt to go through. So you can sometimes use a screwdriver inside the bottom of the strut to kind of leverage it to the side, or here I'm just kind of work it around. I ended up using the flat side of a wrench to lever against the CV axle and press the bolt to pop through that hole. Okay, we're just about done with the install. This is really a pretty simple process. Just make sure to follow the torque specs for the top and bottom, especially that bottom one. You don't want to over torque it and prematurely wear out the bushing at the bottom of the coilover. Now that we've got these installed and tightened up to the correct torque, we're ready to go test them out and see how they do. I've had these installed for about 6 months, and prior to that I actually had the Tacoma version, and that's how I realized that I needed more dampening. I just had too much spring rate to support the amount of lift I needed, and when I had that higher spring rate with those Tacoma versions, I just had zero rebound dampening. So the Tacoma struts versus the Tundra struts work way better for me in this truck. I'm overall very happy with them. I think they're a pretty good plug-and-play option for someone looking for an off-the-shelf, relatively inexpensive compared to full coilover setups from like Kings or Fox suspension. But I still think they leave room for improvement in that slow to mid-speed range on fire roads like the one you're watching me drive by the Grand Canyon right here. This one, I just remember being super, super jittery. Slow to mid-speed, you're driving along and there's just random rocks in the road, and they just don't react super well to that. They feel pretty harsh when you're hitting that like fire road rocks, or even like washboard in a fire road. But at speed, either off-road or on-road, they're very comfortable. And that's actually a really big benefit of these shocks for my particular setup. I don't have sway bars in the front or the back. I just have the airbags in the back to be able to pump them up and keep the sway down. So having a shock in the front that's on-road tuned for the amount of time that I spend on the road, which is a lot since it's a daily driver, this also works really well. I guess I think like the ultimate option for me might be a shock that has an adjuster, so I can keep them set the way they are with these 6112s on the road, and then when I hit fire roads and get off road for a trip, I can just soften them up, because I don't like driving fast with my setup. I just want to drive mid to slow speed on fire roads and have just like a really, really soft marshmallowy ride. So I think if there is a better option for me out there, it's probably going to be a shock with a adjuster. And I don't know, maybe we'll end up trying one of those out in the future as well.